Next up is Clever Culture Systems, ticker CC5. The company provides intelligent automation solutions to microbiology laboratories and has developed an artificial intelligence and machine learning platform. To tell us more, please welcome Brent Barnes, CEO and Managing Director at Clever Culture Systems. Brent, over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. I'm just going to jump straight into it because we haven't got a lot of time. Thanks for joining today's call. Look, this first slide is designed to be a bit of an attention grab. I'll talk through the rest of the presentation about the market and the technology and what we do, but I think this kind of summarises where we're at from a company maturity perspective. First and foremost, we have some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world as our customers using our product. And so the likes of AstraZeneca, Bristol Myers Squibb, Novo Nordisk, etc., are really kind of showcase customers of ours. I'd kind of highlight in particular AstraZeneca. They've now purchased 11 of our APAS independence instruments, and they've standardized the use of our technology across their largest sterile drug manufacturing sites around the world. So a really great case study, if you like, of the value proposition. And I'll talk a bit later about the land and expand strategy that we have with our customers. I think importantly, some of the commercial delivery, if you like, that we've been able to achieve over the last 18 months is really build a foundation around financial stability. So while we're a biotech company, we're pretty unusual in that we're a biotech company that generated a profit in FY25. And we continue on this, cash flow break even or better journey, which is, like I said, quite unusual from a biotech company. I think one of the nice characteristics that a lot of investors like is a recurring revenue component, and we absolutely have that. So we sell a bit of instrumentation, but we have a piece of software, which is really the heart and where all of our IP is that drives the attractive recurring revenue. We've got cash in the bank. We've raised some options. There's no overhang. A really clear balance sheet. Not looking to raise any capital. So this kind of 18-month track record of delivering financial and establishing financial stability, I think is a really good indicator of where the company is likely to go on a go-forward basis and obviously grow from a standpoint of absolute kind of opportunity. So talking about the problem in the space that we operate, I mentioned some big pharmaceutical companies previously. So we sell to drug manufacturers. And so think of sterile drug manufacturing. If you're manufacturing a drug like Ozempic, Novo Nordisk is one of our customers. Novo can't make enough of Ozempic across their global supply chain right now. And so when customers go through this process of making sterile biological products, they have to have a program called an environmental monitoring program. And what they use is, you can see a picture on the screen here, is a culture plate or a petri dish, and they put that inside of the clean room, and it's effectively designed to ensure that the room is environmentally aseptically clean when these drugs are being manufactured. And so if you think about, that's, and I'll talk about the workflow, but if you think about, well, what's the cost of something going wrong? And you think about things like product recalls, you think of the worst case situation, patients having an adverse event because there may have been a contamination during that manufacturing process. And so the point of really raising that is our customers' value and ability to reduce risk in their manufacturing process. And really that's kind of the heart at really what our product and what our solution aims to offer. But you can see here, really the cost of getting things wrong is high. The manufacturing of drugs is a highly regulated process, and the specific process of environmental monitoring is quite inefficient. And so when we kind of do a bit of a deep dive into what I'm kind of meaning and explaining there, if you're manufacturing a sterile drug in Australia or in China or in India or the US or anywhere in Europe, you must have an environmental monitoring program, and it follows these kind of steps. So you can't opt in or opt out. It's part of the regulatory requirements of manufacturing drugs that are ultimately safe and effective for use by customers. And so on the far left, you've got a whole bunch, you've got culture plates, and there's a couple of different sizes. Those plates go into clean rooms where the manufacturing of these biological products are in place. And you've got this environmental monitoring process where you've got different types of plates that are placed in and around the clean room, and they're rotated constantly. And so it's this constant process of measuring and monitoring the environment. And then the plates go into a clean room and they sit there for 5 days typically, and that's really to encourage any microbial growth or bugs that may grow on plates. And of course, because these rooms are meant to be clean, most of the time there's nothing growing on the plates. But that decision, that manual decision that happens today, is super important, and it's tied to releasing drugs into the market. And so, what we thought would be a great idea is to develop a technology that automated that really critical part of that workflow I described at the very end. So rather than having two microbiologists, so one person looks at it, keys in the results, and it has to go to a second person to do a secondary check because that result's so important, let's develop an instrument and let's develop a capability really driven by a machine learning decision tree algorithm that automates that process. And so that's what our APAS independence instrument does. We load the instrument up with plates, and what happens is a photograph is taken, the algorithm reads and interprets any microbial growth that's on that plate and makes a decision. And those really important decisions are then integrated and fed into the lab IT system, and provides a huge amount of traceability and improvements in this manual process. And so you can kind of see on the image on the screen there's an image of a plate with various growth, and that's an automatic detection that our instrument and the algorithm is providing. And so if you kind of think back at this workflow I described, the benefit for our customers is really about not having to change a lot of their existing workflow. They use their existing culture plates, they use their existing incubators, and they're replacing that manual process, that really critical decision point, with a piece of automation, a bit of kit that automates that process for them. And what that gives to our customers is an ability to improve the quality of the result, because we've now got a permanent image of that plate. We improve the traceability of that result because we're digitizing. There's no manual data entry, and we're doing it more efficiently. In fact, we're doing it about 3 times more efficiently than the incumbent manual process. And the economics are pretty compelling when we think about how the instrument is sold, and we think about this typically on a 7-year useful life. And so that's where we get that $1.5 million of revenue per instrument sold over the 7-year useful life. And so we've got an upfront bit of CapEx, and so that's for the instrument, the hardware itself. We then have an annual software license, and that's for the algorithms that we've got and designed that does all the real-time interpretation. We provide service and maintenance for these instruments, and then we have some once-off implementation services. So you can kind of see the split across there. So about 40% of that $1.5 million being upfront, and then you work your way down around that recurring revenue component. Obviously, the recurring revenue being predominantly driven by software, and you can assume that that's a very high margin, 90% plus kind of margins. And the opportunity is significant. There are probably 15,000 plus, we estimate, sterile drug manufacturing facilities globally, creating a pretty significant total addressable market for us. But I think kind of bringing that back down to, well, what's realistic for our cost base? And that's where we kind of talk about our sales strategy. And that's really to target the largest pharmaceutical companies globally. And the reason why we do that is twofold. The first is that they have the most to benefit, because they simply have more manufacturing facilities globally that could benefit from the automated solution that we're providing. The second important part of that is that we can create a really lean, nimble, and focused sales organization, because all of these groups have a centralized center of excellence around environmental monitoring, where they're looking at all the trends of all of their global clean rooms. They're looking at new technology, they're assessing new technology, and they're able to adopt that on a global basis. And so it means that our cost base is able to really be quite successful in what we've been able to achieve so far, engaged in 14 of the top 20 biggest pharma companies in the world, a pipeline of over 40 qualified leads that represents a revenue opportunity of about $75 million, in addition to a $15 million recurring revenue opportunity. So quite compelling in that regard. We have got some competition, but they offer a very different technology solution, if you like. And so what they do, back to kind of paralleling that workflow example, is that they automate the incubation and the reading in one instrument. And that has some real limitations. And the main limitation is the incubator capacity. So the number of plates that you can put into this fridge. And so the biggest competitor that's got the most market share is the group in the middle, Rapid Micro Biosystems. They're a NASDAQ listed company, and they've got about 190 instruments that they've installed into, or sold, I should say, to pharma customers all around the world. So it kind of shows that there's a market, which is good. The problem that they've got is that, that incubation capacity, the fridge is 660 plates. And so if you kind of think about how that works practically, because it's a 5-day incubation time, you've got to divide the 660 by 5. And so that means you've got 132 plates that you can load into that incubator at every day. Now, if you generate 133 plates or 150 plates or 200 or 300 plus plates, you've got to have more instruments. And so you kind of go from this, comparison of in our case, being able to automate about 1,600 plates in a single day using one instrument, to if you wanted to have that same scale with some of these competing instruments, you're talking about 6 or 7 of those instruments that are required to manage your workflow. So it ends up being millions of dollars of difference when you kind of consider that in practice. I jumped over a slide there, sorry. And I like to use this AstraZeneca case study because they have sites and facilities globally that have 1,000 plus plates that every single day need to go into incubators and then obviously manually read. And this slide on the left actually forms the basis of a presentation that they've provided many times where, probably the problem that they're trying to solve through our technology. So 1,000 plates every day need to be read manually by 2 people. Most of them are negative. Humans make mistakes, and this picture is a great example of a case study that they showed during their validation of a colony that was missed, a tiny translucent colony that was missed in their manual process that APAS correctly identified. So this land and expand model where you start with one center of excellence kind of evaluation or testing of the instrument, and once that testing phase is done, they expand and standardize through their network, and that's exactly what AstraZeneca has done over the last year. So a great case study proving that out. And we have been successful in being able to generate sales globally. So a global footprint, about 27, it's a bit more than that now, installed and sold globally. Most of them happen to be in Europe, but we're really not geography focused, we're customer focused. So really it's about finding that center of excellence in these big customer accounts, and then they help us expand in partnership with us through their global network. Every company's got to tell you they have experienced border management, so I'll do the same thing and confirm that. But I think probably the one difference here is that we all have skin in the game. So border management hold about 20% of the company. So we're on the same side of the fence as our investors and shareholders. So in terms of outlook, what can you expect? Well, you can expect us to it's kind of a two-pronged strategy. We're going to add new big pharma customers to that growing list I mentioned before. In addition to that, we're going to work with them through their kind of test phase. And why that's important is because once they get through that testing phase of the technology within their own organization, that's where they look to expand. And that's kind of the exciting part of the value proposition that we bring in FY26 and beyond. And importantly, we're going to do this in a really disciplined way. We've got plenty of cash in the bank, and we're going to maintain a cash flow break even or better position on a go forward basis. So I don't have a final slide, Lauren, that's my last one. And so happy to open it up now for any questions if we've got enough time.
Thank you, Brent. It's such an interesting space indeed. Now, just back to AstraZeneca, the company has rolled out multiple APAS instruments across global sites. So what does that deployment tell us about how the technology scales within large pharmaceutical manufacturers?
Yeah, it's a great case study, obviously. And I think back to the point that drug manufacturing is highly regulated. And so really what pharmaceutical customers are wanting to do is to create standardization. And that's what they've got. And across what we find within our customer base is that whether it's AstraZeneca or Bristol Myers Squibb or Pfizer, is that they have a very similar sterile drug manufacturing process. And that's really important because it creates an opportunity that once the technology is validated at one site, they can reuse that validation work across a global network. And so it means that you kind of do all the work once, and then the expand throughout the network still takes some time, and there's still some need for those sites to do something, but it's a very much of a cookie cutter kind of rollout plan.
Now, each APAS system can generate revenue through a mix of hardware, software, licenses, and recurring services. So how important is the recurring revenue to the long-term business model?
Yeah, I mean, we're not the only company who thinks that's super important. I think the nice idea about the recurring revenue for us is it's software. And, we've now developed the software. Now, there's some surveillance that we do and support, and we'll make the software better over time, but importantly, it's a very high margin recurring revenue. And so, it's a foundational part of our go forward financials that's stacking up really well. We think we'll do over $1 million this year in recurring revenue, and that's only obviously going to grow as we expand our installed base.
Now, you mentioned that you weren't targeting customers geographically, it was more by customer type. So what's the sales pipeline look like?
Yeah, I mentioned that we got over 40 customers in our pipeline, and we're in 14 of the top 20. So I would say that, look, our focus from a sales execution perspective remains on the top 20, and that's where really our effort's going, because I don't want to build out a big, large and expensive sales organisation. I want to keep us lean and nimble. Now, that's not to say that as we go through this process and we become better known, that we're not going to have a customer who is just a single opportunity. In fact, we've got a customer in Perth, Novacina, and they bought one, and they'll only ever buy one. That's kind of all they need. So we're going to get some organic growth from those type of customers. But look, our focus really is around big pharma. Like I said, they've got the most to benefit. They have an ability to scale across their organisation, and that's why it's quite an attractive value proposition for us to target that group of stakeholders.
So there are other automation solutions in the microbiology market. So how does APAS compare in terms of throughput and efficiency?
Yeah, it's that scalability benefit that we get. So I think the other solutions where they've kind of had some successes in the cell and gene therapy part of pharmaceutical manufacturing, and that is a growing market segment. But by scales of magnitude bigger than that is the biologics market. And I use Ozempic as the case study. They can't make enough Ozempic, and so you've got vast, huge majorities of these plates going through these biological facilities, and they focus more on the smaller manufacturing sites in that cell and gene therapy space. So I actually think we can kind of coexist. I think there's value that our competitors bring in that smaller kind of footprint of organisations, but there's a much bigger opportunity that's at play here when you're decoupling the incubation and the reading, which is exactly what we've done as an endpoint reader to that process.
Now, the company reported its maiden profit in FY25 and highlighted a cash flow positive position. So how should investors think about the financial trajectory from here?
Look, I think a bit more of the same. I think we're making stable progress. I'd characterise, and it's a good question. So FY25 was profitable, and that was a great result. We sold 11 instruments, but importantly, 9 out of those 11 were sold to AstraZeneca. So that's one customer. So that's great. It shows the land and expand strategy works and there's opportunity, but 80% of your revenue from one customer is not a sustainable business model. So I characterise FY26 as building out that customer pipeline, and that's where we have added the likes of Novo Nordisk, we have added Pfizer, we have added Boehringer Ingelheim, and so in FY26 we're going to do more of the same, but we're going to do it across a larger customer base. And what we're signalling to investors here is that FY26, don't expect significant growth on FY25. It's about building resilience in that customer pipeline, knowing that as we start landing those customers, which we've done already in FY26, that's creating the scalability opportunity that we expect to start in FY27 and beyond.
Now, you referenced a $2.8 billion total addressable market for microbiology testing in pharmaceutical manufacturing. So what portion of that market do you realistically believe the company can capture over time?
Yeah, I'll draw back to that kind of comment in that slide I had, because everyone says that there's a massive market that's available. What we're focused on is the top 20 biggest pharma. We're in 14 of the top 20. Outside of that, we've said we've got a pipeline of 40 customers that we've been able to generate, and that's our pipeline. And if we were to convert that pipeline, that represents a $75 million CapEx or revenue opportunity with a $15 million recurring revenue component. So if you're like, what's realistic? Yes, it's a big market, and investors should know that it's a big market. But what are we going after? What's in front of us, and what are we getting up every day to kind of achieve? Well, it's that pipeline of 40 customers and converting those. That's what's real and in front of us here and now.
And looking ahead, are there any other key milestones that investors should watch out as the company continues to commercialise the technology? You have touched on a few, but is there any other you'd like to call out?
Oh, look, Lauren, I think adding new customers, but so it's not about a new customer, it's about who that big customer is. And so if that new customer is one of the top 20 big pharma, well, that's a big tick. So I think look out for that, and we expect that to happen in FY26. And then I think kind of maybe looking a bit beyond in the second half of this calendar year, start thinking about, when will the company have orders from existing customers, because that's signalling the commencement of that expand phase. And that's where things get really exciting for our company.
Brent Barnes, thank you for the update.
Thanks, Lauren.